let's stick with turntables. Turntables are a thing in 2022. So before we talk about budget turntables, and we're talking about under £500 here, Ed, and your recommendations in terms of what people should be looking at for that kind of money and what kind of performance you're going to get. Is it worth someone who has no vinyl collection at the moment? Is it worth somebody getting into vinyl now, or is this hobby for somebody that's already invested in some way? Maybe they've got stuff in the loft or whatever.
Do you know what? It's one of those ones. If you do feel that you'll have the disposable income to buy a meaningful quantity of records, and that's not a small undertaking. I mean, you can still buy cheap records, but they're usually awful now. So the costs involved are significant. Then yes, it is. I mean, it's still a tremendously entertaining and engaging way of listening to music. But if you have no records right now, and you're at the moment you don't budget anything for physical media purchases, no, don't go anywhere near it. Leave it well alone. It's simply going to be a colossal expenditure, and you'll never really reap the benefits because you don't have much media to enjoy on it. I mean,
I definitely see this as the Laserdisc of today. In those terms, you're spending an awful lot on the software. You're spending an awful lot on the vinyl. It's £25 the average price.
Oh God, yeah. New releases hover between 19 and 25 these days. And for example, this week's final of the month is a lot more than that, although it is bigger. So yes, if we're talking about £500 turntables, that's the equivalent price. If you spent £500 on a turntable and then you spent £500 again on albums, you're still only looking at about 25, 30 albums, which is, when you then compare it to the fact that you have virtually the entire world's recorded music available to you on most streaming services, you've got to really want to do this.
Yeah.
So don't be swayed by the allure of it unless you really want, you either have access to a number of records already, or that you're going to be able to. I mean, I don't regard myself as buying too many records at the moment, but I'm still spending an easy £80 to £100 a month on the damn things, and I don't consider myself as buying very many of them at the moment. So make of that what you will. I mean, I dare say that's me confessing to a significant first world problem there, but nevertheless, that's the long and the short of it. And this also then feeds into your decisions that you make if you are going to buy a turntable. And Phil actually messaged me a couple of days ago, did I want to talk about under £1,000 or under £500? And I said it has to be £500. If you can spend £1,000 on a turntable, some of the stuff I'm going to talk about doesn't apply, because you don't have to make the either or decision I'm about to talk about. Turntables under £500 break down into two categories, really, because there's very, very capable turntables which will save you a bit of money, but they don't have much stretch. It always used to be with, even comparatively affordable turntables, inflation notwithstanding, that you could spend the money and then you could upgrade that turntable, like, my grandmother's axe or the ship of Theseus or however you want. So, and what ended up had very little in common with the device you'd bought, but it was still technically the same turntable. That's almost impossible now under £500. The last two examples of this that really exist in budget, you've got the Pro-Ject debut carbon. It's the carbon DC, which we've done a review of on the site. We've also covered all the upgrades for it because it is so upgradable. That's a penny under £500. So your budget will be maxed, but over time, from Pro-Ject, without having to do any bodging, any warranty invalidation, any of that, you can buy a whole selection of parts that would take you well past £1,000, continuously getting better all the time. There's also the Audio-Technica LP5X, which is a bit less formulaic in how you update it, because it responds more to third-party components than it does anything that Audio-Technica makes, other than updating the stylus. And those two turntables are ones, if you know that you're going to get stuck into this, and that it's something that you're going to commit to, it gives you the scope to stretch those turntables without having to sell them and buy again. Otherwise, it's interesting, in the thread, in the comments, Nigel Henry, he has a Riga Planer 2, which is an absolutely joyous sounding record player. And it's easy to set up. It is attractive. It is elegant. Nigel's has experimented with changing cartridges and changing phono stages, which you can do on most turntables. The scope for how far you can push a planer 2 is smaller than those two turntables I've talked about. Riga has economized by making it more of a fixed pattern item. Now, these products sound excellent, but it means that if you do want to push your vinyl habit in future, you're going to have to look at selling it and buying another turntable. I mean, obviously, in the context of how we update our AV equipment and other things, selling it and buying another one is perfectly normal. And unlike AV equipment, it does usually have resale value. But the whole idea of vinyl used to be that you could actually, you'd buy something and it would just grow and stretch. I mean, the gyro deck that lived with me has had, in the time that I've owned it, has had 6 different arms on it. And it had more even before I bought it. Now that leads on to the other thing. At £500, there are plenty of used turntables. And you can make a useful saving. You can end up buying something which costs substantially more, and you get that sort of, and because let's face it, the technology is obsolete. This isn't the same as buying a 3-year-old AV receiver. You're not missing out on the latest bells and whistles if you buy something which is 20, 25 years old. The only thing is, if you do buy something which is 20 or 25 years old, it goes without saying it's lived 2 decades. Go into buying anything used with your eyes open, but turntables and speakers especially, they're not immortal. They respond very badly to being mistreated. And if something looks too good to be true, I absolutely 100% assure you that it is too good to be true. So £500 used will go further, but don't go in blind. I mean, turntables do crop up in our own classifieds, and there's obviously the greater degree of protection from how we operate the classifieds here, but there's not that many of them. You are normally going to have to throw yourself onto the tender mercies of eBay or similar to find a significant choice of used turntables. So all of those are options, but the question that Phil asked right at the beginning is the best one. You have to be absolutely sure that you really want to do this. I mean, it's just off screen here for people watching. I have a 12-hole Kallax, which has records A to O in it, and that's 20 years of collecting. And then there's another 8-unit Kallax, which has got P to Z, and the replacement cost of it is astronomical. There's, as Phil says, there's elements of Laserdisc. There's also elements of the housing market. At the moment, people being suckered in to buy new turntables are fundamentally maintaining an industry of lots of shiny new lovely records being pressed for people like me. And people coming into it now aren't seeing anything of the same benefits, which bringing out my inner social justice there is something that you need to take into account. But if you do have questions, you can obviously stick them into the comment section here or the comment section in the podcast thread after it arrives on the forums. But honestly, you have to, do you think you have to sit down and think, am I willing to spend £500 on a record player, and then, to have a meaningful number of new releases somewhere between, 2 new releases is 50 quid a month, 4 is 100. You start working on that principle and decide if it is really the exercise for you, especially if you're also still buying 4K media, which is similar sort of cost these days, as I understand it.
Yeah, it is indeed. Nigel Henry makes a good point in the comments as well. He says you actually listen to the full album and you don't skip. And of course, you got the beauty of physical media. And I guess that's something I hadn't really considered. I have access, like lots of people do, to streaming audio. I very, very rarely sit and listen to the whole thing all the way through. I'm really bad for skipping and so on. But I guess, Ed, it comes to that point where you've got to get up off your backside to go and put a record on. Then you have to walk back, sit down, listen to it. You're not going to
also, if you are someone that enjoys a drink of an evening, you have to understand that there comes a time in the evening where you should switch to digital, because if you don't, you will cause something significant grief. If you're lucky, you'll just cause the record grief. If you're not lucky, you'll cause your cartridge grief. And that can get very expensive very quickly. But no, I completely agree with Nigel. Last night, I listened back to back. It was a varied evening. I listened to the Notorious B.I.G.'s Ready to Die. And then I listened to one of the previous albums of the week from a while back, the live Brand New Heavies, Shibuya 357 on vinyl, start to finish, no skipping, no nothing, and it was glorious. So yeah, I mean, if you can, if it appeals to you, please don't let me put you off. You just need to go in with your eyes open about just how much this is going to end up costing you.
It's something I do miss. It's something I used to do as a stress release a number of years ago. I would go and lock myself in the cinema room and listen to an album. Dim the lights and then just sit with a drink and just listen to the whole thing. And that's something that I don't do anymore. And I certainly miss that aspect. So again, it's something that appeals to me. And before we change subject, let's quickly go around the team. Jules, vinyl, you still collecting? Or is
no, I got rid of mine in the 80s.
Yeah.
When CD came out, that was it. Get rid of it.
Right.
It's the future.
Yeah, well, my daughter's just bought. Well, she bought last year. She bought a cheap turntable. One of the speakers is already blown from Amazon. She got about four LPs. I'm just wondering, Ed, what's the second-hand prices like for vinyl now? Because
no, certain things. Yeah. I'm going to discuss this with the vinyl of the week. There are albums here, Jules, that I've paid. Well, the best example, tragically, it's an album I no longer own because I sold it as a batch of albums when I was made redundant in 2009. I bought Echo Park by Feeder new in 2001, and I paid £18 for it. I sold it to an incredibly excited man for £255 in 2009. It's now worth well over £400. Wow. And the other one, Athlete. Do you remember Athlete? They had an album called Tourist. I bought that for £17 and I sold it to an excited man in Germany for 180, even though it's dreadful. Huh. So yeah, it can go bananas, Jules. I mean, if you've got certain things in limited presses, the most sensible thing you do is never play it. Just look happily at it.
Well, my dad's 82. He's got a huge record collection still. I don't think it ever gets played, but he had an original Buddy Holly on the album cover had without the glasses, which apparently is quite rare.
Oh no, stuff like that. Oh yeah. God, this is the great thing. If you do cash out, generally speaking, it's always worth more than zero, and you actually have to work quite hard to buy modern vinyl releases, which depreciate significantly because there's no such thing as a repress. Really, everything just gets done as a first pressing. And when it's sold. There's no more of them. I mean, there's always exceptions to that. There's 400 different versions of Fleetwood Mac Rumours and so on and so forth. And Adele's album was pressed in vast quantities. But no, it can be, unlike so much of this hobby, it can at least be either revenue neutral or actually make you a profit, but only if you cash out.
Yeah,
which as a hoarder I can't do.
Yeah, well, I used to professionally use vinyl back in the day, and obviously had boxes and boxes and boxes of 7-inch and 12-inch and albums, and it all went. All of it went. End of the 90s, it all went, and I miss it. I really do miss it because I had some absolute cracking albums and stuff in those boxes that they all went as a job lot along with turntables and all sorts, and I can't find a turntable now that I want because they were all used for professional work and they're all
worn smooth,
banged to bits. So, Ian, vinyl, yes or no?
No. All my disposable income's going on video games for far too long, so I never really.
Saving up for a power washer.
Yeah, saving up for a power washer.